Welcome back to Justice Reloaded HD. Before we dive into today's heartfelt story, I'd like to ask you something simple yet important. When was the last time you hugged someone, or felt truly hugged back by someone who meant it? Today's story begins with a hug that seemed ordinary at first, but ended up changing two lives in ways no one could have predicted. If you cherish stories that feel small on the surface but are vast in the heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Every week, we bring you a tale that just might soften your heart and perhaps restore a little faith in humanity. The morning rush had just passed at Maggie's Diner, a small family-owned restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Sunlight streamed through the dusty front windows, illuminating the cozy, welcoming interior. The aroma of brewed coffee, fresh biscuits, and hickory bacon hung in the warm air, wrapping the space in a nostalgic comfort that felt like a memory you hadn't realized you missed. Old brick walls lined with faded photographs, checkered floors adorned with scuffs from countless patrons, and mismatched chairs surrounded wooden tables all gave the diner a charm too humble to be labeled as vintage. Locals loved it, not because it was fashionable, but because it was familiar. A reliable refuge where regulars settled into their habitual spots, the waitresses knew their orders by heart, and the cook in the back swore like a sailor but whipped up the fluffiest pancakes in town. On this particular day, the booth by the window, typically reserved for Sheriff Morales and his crossword puzzle, was taken by an unexpected and rather peculiar patron, Daniel Stone, a 60-year-old widower and reclusive billionaire. This was a man who built an empire from mining contracts and complex logistics deals so intricate that most folks merely nodded politely whenever he attempted to explain them. He was not the type of person you'd expect to find in a place like Maggie's. Daniel was too rich, too pressed, and too distant. And yet, there he sat in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to appear approachable, though his posture remained stiff and guarded, like someone who had never really learned how to relax in public. Across from him was his only son, Leo, a frail 6-year-old with a mop of blonde curls that desperately needed a comb. His little body was curled tightly, arms wrapped around himself as if seeking comfort that he couldn't find. He stared blankly at the table, utterly transfixed, as if it might suddenly spring to life and provide an escape. A blueberry muffin lay untouched on his plate, a tragic symbol of his unease. Leo had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and an emotional developmental delay, a combination of characteristics Daniel had paid specialists to explain, yet those explanations remained frustratingly unclear. All Daniel really knew was that his son didn't like being touched, struggled to make eye contact for more than a fleeting moment, and had, at that point, never hugged his father. Not once. Emily Vargas, one of the diner's waitresses, noticed all of this without needing to pry. Having recently refilled the coffee of a couple in the adjacent booth, she caught sight of the boy's discomfort. The way his shoulders locked tight, fingers twitching near the edge of the table as if they wished to recoil into safety. Adjusting her apron, she crossed the room toward their booth, bringing with her a kind of gentle energy that was palpable yet quiet, like the calm before a storm. Emily was bright-eyed and approachable despite being well into her morning shift. She had worked at the diner for almost a year, long enough for the regulars to know about her past as a trained pediatric nurse before life twisted along uncertain paths. She had developed a soft spot for children, especially the quiet ones who needed a little extra care. As she arrived at the booth, she didn't rush her greeting. She didn't crouch down for some awkward baby talk that might distress Leo further. Instead, she met Daniel's eyes with a soft but understanding nod, then turned her gaze toward the boy. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, almost soothing. "Can I get you something else, sweetie? Maybe some warm milk?" Leo didn't answer, but he looked up for just a split second, and in Emily's experience, that brief eye contact was more meaningful than any spoken word. What transpired next felt like an eternity in slow motion. A plate crashed in the kitchen, a sudden, sharp sound that pierced the otherwise cozy ambiance. causing Leo's little body to jolt as if struck. His breathing hitched, rapid and shallow, and his eyes darted around the diner like those of a cornered animal. He pressed his tiny hands against his ears, his body rocking slightly as the world around him became too loud, too bright, too disorienting. "Leo," Daniel said softly, then with a bit more urgency, "Leo, it's okay. It's just a plate." But the boy wasn't hearing him, trapped in his spiraling anxiety. Without thinking, Emily moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, but purposefully. She stepped out from behind the counter and knelt a few feet away from Leo. She maintained enough distance to respect his space, but was close enough that he could see her. Instead of speaking again, she opened her arms wide, palms up, an invitation. Leo stared at her, breath still quick and chest trembling. Seconds passed, feeling like lifetimes, and then, without a word or warning, he got up from the booth, walked slowly toward her, and folded himself into her arms. The diner seemed to hold its breath, all eyes turning toward the unexpected display of vulnerability. Daniel stood frozen, hand still halfway across the table, mouth slightly open. In 6 long years, he had never once been hugged by his son until that moment. Emily didn't hug him tightly, she simply held him gently, allowing him to melt into her embrace at his own pace. She could feel his small body relax after a few moments, his breath slowing, as if the weight he had carried for so long was finally lifted, if only for a fleeting instant. The next morning, as Emily wiped down the counter, she spotted Daniel Stone again. He wore that same crisp shirt, but there was a noticeable difference in his demeanor. He didn't walk in like a man tolerating the presence of others. This time, he entered with the air of someone searching for something he wasn't sure he deserved to find. He waited until the breakfast crowd had thinned before approaching Emily at the counter. No entourage, no assistant, just a man standing quietly, holding his hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you," he started, his voice rougher than it had been the day before. "For what you did yesterday," he added, glancing away. Emily looked up from the coffee pot and smiled uncertainly. "He's a sweet boy," she replied, acknowledging Leo. Daniel hesitated, clearly grappling with the complexities of his son's situation. "He's not like other children. He screams when doctors try to check his heartbeat. He won't even sit beside his therapists." His voice faltered. "But yesterday? He walked across a room and hugged you." Emily nodded slowly, empathizing with the emotional turmoil Daniel must have faced as a father. She knew that the intimacy of a simple hug could feel monumental for a child like Leo. "Sometimes," she said gently, "kids just know when someone's not trying to fix them." Daniel was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I don't know what you do outside of this place, but I'd like to offer you something. Not a job, not exactly. I just thought maybe you could spend time with Leo. Talk to him or don't, play a game, read a book, or just sit. Whatever feels right." Emily looked at the card, but didn't take it immediately. "I'd pay you well," he added quickly, almost embarrassed to mention it. But Emily wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the way the boy had pressed his face into her shoulder, how his breath had slowed while she held him, how in that moment the weight upon his little chest seemed to lift entirely. "I'll think about it," she replied, placing the card beside the napkin dispenser. Daniel nodded, turning to leave, but paused almost awkwardly. "One more thing," he said, hesitating. "I found this on the floor of the back seat. I think it's meant for you." He handed her a folded piece of paper, small and creased, the edges bent from being gripped too tightly by tiny fingers. Emily opened it carefully. Inside, in thick crayon strokes, was a drawing. 2 stick figures with arms outstretched and a shaky red heart between them. Wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. She stared at it for a long moment, her throat tightening unexpectedly. Some invitations don't come in envelopes. Some don't use words at all. Some come in the simple form of a child's drawing, born from a place deeper than language. She looked up at Daniel, her voice softer than before. "Tell him I'd love to come by, just for a little while." Daniel nodded again, But there was something different in his eyes this time, not just relief, but something closer to hope. Emily didn't know what this meant for her life. She hadn't planned on anything changing. Yet in that moment, she understood something had already shifted. Not because a billionaire had asked her to help, but because a child she barely knew had silently asked her for connection without uttering a single word. As the days turned into weeks, Emily never treated her time with Leo like a job. She didn't come with a clipboard, behavior charts, or therapeutic exercises. She didn't try to fix him, diagnose him, or pull him out of his quiet world. Instead, she simply showed up day after day with a soft voice, gentle presence, and a worn tote bag filled with picture books, colored pencils, and scraps of blank paper. "Would you like to draw today or listen to a story?" she would ask each time she arrived. Sometimes Leo would point, sometimes he'd shrug, or sometimes he'd say nothing at all. And that was perfectly fine. Emily would sit beside him on the floor of the sunroom, never too close, but never too far, and begin anyway. She told stories without pictures, just her voice and hands painting vivid imagery in the air. She talked about turtles who were afraid of thunderstorms or birds who didn't know how to fly until they tried. The stories didn't always go as planned. Her drawings were never perfect, often wobbly dogs with too many legs, trees with crooked branches, and stick figures with quirky grins. Leo would watch, seemingly amused, sometimes reaching out to grab a crayon and adding something of his own. A second sun, a missing cloud, a wild scribble that looked like nothing and everything simultaneously. Every now and then, when Leo's breath hitched or his shoulders tensed from a sound outside, Emily would pause and remind him, "If you feel scared, you can hug me or let me hug you." Her voice remained soft, the offer always optional. She never forced it. She didn't reach out first, and often Leo wouldn't respond. But then slowly, something began to shift. One cloudy afternoon, Leo dropped his green crayon and walked straight to her, arms open and silent. Another evening, after an especially long and wordless day, he leaned into her shoulder, letting out a heavy sigh that felt like years of suppressed emotion slipping away. Once, after a brief moment where Daniel had misread his son's signals and spoken too loudly, Leo turned to Emily, eyes wide and wet, and hugged her tightly, grounding himself in her steadiness. It wasn't therapy, it was presence. And for Leo, presence made all the difference. Daniel Stone had always believed in control, strength, and discipline. His world was one of numbers and deadlines, negotiations, and consequences. He had built his empire from nothing, deals struck in boardrooms, contracts signed in silence, and emotions left at the door. In this world, affection was something you earned. Vulnerability felt like a luxury for those who had the time to indulge in weakness. But lately, something was shifting. Uncomfortably and quietly, Daniel found himself lingering by the door longer when Emily was with Leo, watching as his son leaned into her side, comfortable and trusting without flinching. He noticed how Leo's hands, once constantly clenched, now rested softly in his lap. How his eyes didn't dart around the room so frantically anymore. Daniel couldn't explain the knot that formed in his chest as he witnessed those small moments. He simply felt the ache of longing to understand connection. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in his experience as a father. One afternoon, Daniel met with an old business associate over coffee in a downtown hotel lounge. Gerald Trent, known for his oil money and brash demeanor, was never one to shy away from controversy. As he swirled a drink in his glass, he said, "Word around the golf club is that you've got some waitress playing nanny to your kid now." Daniel raised an eyebrow but remained silent, curious to see where this conversation might lead. Gerald chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "Come on, Dan. A waitress? What did she do? Bat her eyelashes at you? You really paying her so your son can, what, hug her?" Daniel's face didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. He took a slow sip of coffee, setting the cup down with unwavering precision. "Yes," he replied, simply and firmly. Gerald blinked, caught off guard at the frankness. "You are?" Daniel nodded, his voice calm but resolute. "Because my son hadn't hugged anyone in over 2 years. Not me, not anyone. Now he does. Now he knows what it feels like to trust someone, to feel safe." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "If I'm paying for that, I'd say it's the best investment I've made in a long time." Gerald didn't laugh again, and for the first time in ages, Daniel didn't feel the need to defend softness. Not anymore. The photo surfaced on a Tuesday morning, hidden among clickbait headlines and gossip-driven chatter. It wasn't even of high quality, slightly grainy and taken from across the diner through the glare of the windows. But it didn't need to be sharp. The image told its own story. A small boy had his arms wrapped tightly around a woman's waist, face buried in her sweater. And just a few feet away, unnoticed by the camera, stood Daniel, a man with silver at his temples and confusion in his eyes. The headline declared it all: "Billionaire's son clings to unknown waitress, morning cuddle, or something more." By noon, the photograph had spread across local blogs, some national gossip sites, and even landed a spot in a segment of daytime television. Panelists speculated about inappropriate boundaries and questioned why wealthy parents would trust strangers with their children. Daniel saw the article while leaving a lunch meeting, a concerned text from his assistant popping up with a link reading, "You'll want to handle this before it spirals." He didn't open the article right away. Instead, he stared at the thumbnail, a snapshot of Leo in one of his most vulnerable moments, broadcasted to the world without acknowledging his innocence. And standing beside him, almost protectively, was Emily. Daniel's jaw tightened and a familiar anger burned in his chest. In less than an hour, he pulled strings to remove the most viral versions of the story. His legal team drafted cease and desist letters, and his PR consultant called it unfortunate but manageable. But none of that mattered, as one question spiraled in his mind. How had this gotten out? Remembering the quiet days in the sunroom, Emily's calming presence, and that cherished drawing Leo had made, Daniel felt a wave of nausea crash over him. The progress, the trust, how could it have been shattered so quickly? By late afternoon, Daniel made up his mind. He didn't confront Emily. He didn't ask for an explanation. He simply called the diner, asked for her shift schedule, and left a message with the manager. Tell her the arrangement is over. No further visits, no contact, no signatures, no goodbyes. Emily received the message during a break, her heart sinking as she processed the words. She didn't cry. She didn't call back. Instead, she walked to the back room, sat down, and unfolded the drawing Leo had once given her. Staring at the stick figures and the red crayon heart, still smudged from little fingers, she realized that the innocent bond they had formed was ruptured by the exposure of vulnerability. No one had to tell her what had happened. She had seen the headline that morning too, and it stung deeper than the photograph itself. What hurt worse was knowing that Daniel hadn't even bothered to check with her first. He hadn't stopped to wonder whether she was contributing to the story, collaborating with the media, or operating from a place of love and support. It felt as though Daniel had assumed the worst of her. It was all too much to process. Feeling crushed under the weight of rejection, Emily reached into her bag, folded the drawing back into its original creases, and tucked it away. Some connections, it seemed, weren't meant to last. In the weeks that followed, life continued but shifted unrecognizably. Daniel remained caught in the media storm, his protective instincts driving him to seek refuge in his corporation, burying himself in work while containing the chaos that had unfolded. Meanwhile, Emily tried to move forward, grieving the loss of the bond she had formed with Leo. Yet, even in the absence of her usual visits, she often wondered how he was. The new silence left an echo in her heart, one that throbbed with every thought of the innocent boy who had changed her life without even realizing it. Days turned into weeks, and something in Daniel began to shift visibly. He found it more challenging to separate himself from the emotional undertow of his actions. Walking through his home, he noticed the silence where laughter used to be, the emptiness where Leo's playful antics would have filled the air. He began wondering whether he, too, had misunderstood the space he had carved out between himself and his son. Vulnerability had always felt like a weakness, but perhaps it had simply been the act of embracing tenderness that made them human. One evening, as Daniel sat in his study, the remnants of the media controversy still swirling in his mind, he picked up his phone and opened a new message to Emily. It was a simple note, an olive branch. "I miss Leo. I miss having you both in my life. Can we talk?" He hesitated, finger hovering over the send button, but finally pressed it down. The warmth of that decision washed over him, followed by a persistent heartbeat of uncertainty. But he knew one truth. He didn't want to lose what little connection he had left. Minutes turned into hours, and just as he started to doubt if she would reply, his phone buzzed with her response. "I miss Leo too. I'm willing to meet and talk. Just let me know when." With that, a thread of a connection began to reweave their broken bond. Slowly, cautiously, Daniel proposed a few days later at a nearby bookstore cafe, a neutral ground where the weight of their past interactions would feel lighter, more forgiving, like the first step in rebuilding a bridge that had once been burned. On the day of their meeting, Daniel arrived early, heart pounding and mind racing as he wrestled with the familiar sensation of vulnerability, the very thing he had once learned to avoid. But he knew he needed to be brave. When Emily walked in, carrying her worn tote bag, a sense of nostalgia flooded through Daniel. They exchanged nervous smiles, the warmth of familiarity gathering around them despite the awkwardness of their previous fallout. "Hey," he started, his voice less steady than he'd hoped. "Hey," she replied, sitting across from him. "I've been meaning to apologize," he began, eyes searching hers for understanding. "For how I handled everything. It was unfair to you. I let my emotions and the media dictate my actions rather than trusting you." Emily nodded, appreciating the openness. "I get it, Daniel. You were trying to protect Leo, but I felt like a pawn instead of a partner in that. It was painful, you know." "I know," he admitted. "You were never a pawn. You've brought something precious into our lives. Leo, he needs someone like you." In that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but in their perceptions of what vulnerability meant. Perhaps it wasn't simply weakness. Perhaps it was a gentle invitation to connect, to rebuild, and to accept support from one another. "I'd like to continue our arrangement," Daniel suggested carefully, "but this time, I want you to be an active part of Leo's journey. Together, we can nurture his growth." Emily felt a swell of hope within her. "I want that too," she said lightly, the tension in her shoulders easing at the possibilities ahead. As they continued to talk, they shared laughter and stories, growing more comfortable as memories mingled with possibilities for the future. The threads of their lives began to intertwine again, creating a tapestry sewn with understanding, patience, and hope. Before long, Daniel extended his hand. "Let's do this right," he said earnestly. "Let's rebuild the trust we started." Emily took his hand in hers, feeling the warmth of their renewed connection. Yes, let's. And so, a once shattered bond transformed into something beautiful, breathing life back into rooms that had felt empty for far too long. Daniel realized that allowing himself to be vulnerable didn't limit his strength. It expanded it. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel witnessed Leo blossom before his eyes, their home filled with laughter once more. And Emily remained a constant, ready with crayons and stories, patiently guiding Leo in what it meant to navigate the world and embrace connection. With every visit, as Leo leaned into her arms, the whispered embrace of the past remained alive, woven into a fabric of hope that the three of them could build together. Sometimes, it takes an ordinary hug, a moment suspended in time, to remind us of the extraordinary power of human connection. And in the quiet corners of Maggie's diner, where this story began, the act of embracing the vulnerable quietly restored faith in humanity, one hug at a time.